Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. So about a year ago, I did a video on how to replace this whole entire lever perch. As what the lever perch is the combination of the lever and the mounting stock for your mirror. So oftentimes you'll strip out this mounting stock in the mirror, maybe the scooter tipped over, you'll break off a chunk of the mirror. Maybe you break the lever or you'll break a part of the mechanism. I'm gonna show you how to change this piece out. It's very inexpensive. The one thing with the Sprint and the Primavera, there's two variations of this lever perch, and they change the design of the cable end based on the year. So if you have a 2017 or earlier Primavera or Sprint 50 or a 150, even a 125, you're looking at a CM 063 806 is the part number. And if you have a newer one, 2018 and newer, this is a fairly new scooter here, a 2020 or 2021, you're going to be looking at CM 063 809. It has a larger cable insert. They're both reverse threads on the mirror, and the problem with this one is most of the threads are loose. Like I can't tighten the mirror all the way. It will just, you know, I tighten this up and you can just tell it's pulling the mirror out, and I'll just be able to break it free a lot. And if I pull this out, you'll see a little bit later when I have the perch out, there's like pretty much nothing left of the mirror. The aluminum threads are pretty fragile. On the standard threads, which you find on the right side, or any of the older scooters, see how loose that is? It's possible to put a threaded insert such as a time cert or a helicoil, and that's typically how we repair them in our service center. But considering these are pretty inexpensive, we're just gonna go in here and replace this. So pretty similar across the board for all the modern Vespas, but the Sprint and Primavera, they kind of have the clamshell plastic covers over the handlebar that open from the horizontal. So let's get right to it. Let's get the appropriate tools. Not wearing glasses these days, so kind of want to put safety glasses on, and you get in a habit of doing that. So here's the basic tools that you need in order to replace that lever perch. I recommend having a larger flat bladed screwdriver, a T25 Torx driver, a number 2 Phillips driver, which is the standard number 2 Phillips. You're gonna need a combination wrench in both 17mm and 10mm. You're gonna need some type of Allen key in 5mm. It doesn't necessarily need to be this T handle, but just the standard little L-shaped Allen keys. A needle nose and a file could also be handy, but aren't 100% necessary. You're gonna be removing the left-hand grip from the scooter, so you're gonna need to re-glue the grip back on. I highly recommend using the specific grip glue, and the Scooter West part number for the grip glue is Tool GG. This is a single-use tube of grip glue, very inexpensive, and enough to glue on 2 to 4 grips. So let's get right to it. So you got a pair of screws, number 2 Phillips driver, we'll take them off for your headlight rim. And that's both on the Primavera and the Sprint, pretty much the same setup. It's possible to leave this in place, just pop it out, but I'm gonna go ahead and remove the whole entire rim, kind of shift it up, and carefully pull this back. Take care not to lose these clips, because oftentimes they'll snag this plastic here and fall into the frame of the scooter. So the pair of clips. And depending on the year of your Sprint or Primavera, it may be a number 2 screwdriver, Phillips screwdriver under here, or it may be the very latest models have the Torx driver, T25. This one's early enough that it still has the Phillips screws in there. And they are threaded into plastic, so there's quite a bit of friction to get them out. And you can look at my prior videos, you know, typically the videos on removing these pod turnstiles, which is the MI200 PR, that's the Scooter West part number, or you can search on YouTube for MI200 PR, and I pretty much show all the same steps to dismantle the handlebar covers on these Primaveras and Sprints. And the way I like to think about these screws, the shortest screws hold the bezel on. The medium length screws are these frontmost ones holding this cover on, and of course not ever coming off. There's quite a bit of friction pulling these screws out. And the longest screws are going to be on the back half of this handlebar cover. So the camera's probably not going to get it, but there's a pair right in front of the back over here. And that's pretty much all the screws you need to get out of the way. Might as well also get this front chrome piece. This could be a T25 Torx screw typically on all the years. And just keep track of all the screws you're removing. And to remove this, you just pretty much pull it up. It's got a couple snap tabs. You can leave the other mirror in place. And you'll have one connector that holds or connects a speedometer assembly to it. And you just push this tab on the left side of the connector and give it a wiggle, and you'll be able to disconnect the speedometer there. So at this point, it's pretty easy to get this out of the way. You can kind of just pull that right out. So as you can see, the threads are pretty stripped out in that lever perch. Go ahead and remove the left-hand switchgear. There's a screw on the top, and there's one more screw that the turn signal pod's in the way of. There are two different style screws, so keep track of them. And just go ahead and pull the switchgear away. And keep in mind this clip is pretty, prone to coming off, so sometimes I'll just put the screw back in there just to hold the clip in place. And make sure ignition's off. There's going to be a pair of wires that are just push-on terminals onto the brake switch, and they just pull right off. You're not going to be able to disconnect the brake cable too readily. You're going to need to go to the rear brake adjustment and unthread that most of the way to get this disconnected. So I got a 10 millimeter combination wrench, got an inner lock nut on your rear drum brake adjustment. There's nothing wrong with the drum brakes. They're super simple, they last a long time, and they're just super low maintenance. It's not really, disc brake's pretty trick for the rear. I've added a disc brake on my own Sprint, but the drum's quite effective. All right, back to the job. We'll move up to the front. All right, so at this point, the lever has a built-in spring, but we're able to derail the cable. But first things first, you got to get this grip out of the way. And the way to salvage a glued-on grip is to get compressed air, and oftentimes you can get air between the grip and the handlebar tube, and you may need to change the position a couple times. And you can see the glue, it just broke it free. And you could use your fingers to roll this, I don't know what I like to call it, pig snot, and get it out of there, because you're gonna have to slide this tube right over it. And we'll be able to glue this grip right back on and reuse it, no problems. So we'll save this grip, but maybe a perfect opportunity to change your grips. Next, there's a locking screw, and you'll need a 5 millimeter Allen. This is what locks the lever perch to the handlebars. And I would suggest just removing this screw all the way. And there's more than just a screw to this. There's a little ferrule in there that tightens down on the handlebar, and that's what makes the friction. Oftentimes it's pretty difficult to get that out. May need to wiggle it quite a bit. Maybe use a magnet or fish it out, but you can see the little ferrule right there. So those two pieces, now everything's nice and loose. And at this point, the way I like to get the cables out is I'll pull the brakes, and then as I'm releasing it, the cable's kind of got a spring in it, and same with the lever assembly. So you're fighting it a little bit, and go ahead and disconnect that. And at this point, we can pull this all the way back. And there is a little key in there. Sometimes you'll have some little hiccups with what it's, there's like a little bit of a burr where it, where sometimes they hang up. There we go. You got just get past, because see, it makes a little burr right in the handlebar right there. You may want to take a file and file that down. There's one part you are going to want to salvage from the whole lever assembly is this brake switch right here. So it unthreads, and we'll thread it into the new one. So just to show you the difference between the CM063806, which is the earlier part number, this hole is a little smaller. On the CM063809, this is a larger hole, and you can see the cable has gotten larger. They changed this. That's the only difference between these two. They both have the reverse threads, and the cutoffs about 2018 and newer uses this larger later part number. So before you put a new lever perch, oftentimes that little ferrule makes a little burr on the handlebar, and I'd recommend filing it away, because sometimes it's pretty hard to get the new lever perch on there. And if you're wondering how the lever perch is keyed to the handlebars, underneath here, right at the 6 o'clock position, there's a pin that aligns with this notch that's in the lever perch here. So go ahead and thread your existing brake switch into the lever perch. If you're dealing with a much older scooter, I would probably just recommend replacing that brake switch. Pretty inexpensive. Sometimes they do have problems. Go ahead and pull the screw out along with that little ferrule. And at this point, we can slide the lever perch all the way into place. And it kind of is, you can see it will turn up, and then once it's lined up with that peg, you could drop the screw and the ferrule in place and just hold it. And there is some adjustability to this, a small amount. You want to, the idea is to get this, the mirror mount to be perfectly centered in the top handlebar plastic hole. So, and you could do that when everything's all assembled. Come back in here and make a minor adjustment if needed. So go ahead and tighten this up. I don't know what, there's not really a specific torque, but you tighten them pretty tight. Otherwise you end up with a lever perch that will twist on the handlebar, and that's pretty annoying. And then you have the pair of wires that go for your brake switch. There's the older ones on like some of the scooters, it will be a connector. The new ones, they just tend to use these pair of small quick connects, and they're a little bit difficult sometimes to get back on. You know, get both of them on at the same time. There we go. Make sure they're pushed all the way on. You don't want those, they touch the handlebars, oftentimes they'll blow your brake light fuse. So here's the trickiest part. So you have this cable, and you may even just get a needle nose or have a helper, you know, on the back. So built into the brake cable is a spring, and it makes it really difficult to keep this out. So there's a couple ways to skin the cat and pretty much get the cable threaded onto the lever. One of the easiest ways is just go ahead and remove the lever. So you're going to need your 10mm combination wrench. Go ahead and pull this lever pivot screw. And one more thing, it's a perfect opportunity to put a little grease on the screw, because from the factory they don't really put any grease on these screws. And be prepared for a spring to drop out of the lever. So pretty much I'm just showing you how to change a lever, which is a more common operation. You go in here, if the scooter falls over, maybe you'll break a lever, and you get this little screw out. And be prepared for the spring that's engaged in that little pin right there. So at this point, you flip the lever over. We can take the cable and give it a pull. Go ahead and flip this back over. And have to put a little bit of force into it, get the cable engaged into the lever perch itself. So put a little grease on this screw because this is the pivot for your lever right there. And you're gonna have to steer the lever around because you're fighting against the pull of the cable and that spring. So it takes a little bit of effort to get this lined up. And there it's in place, and then we'll go ahead and put the lock nut on the bottom. And I'll get a wrench on nut, give it a couple turns. You don't need to overly tighten it, so you don't want to squeeze the perch. Feels nice and smooth. And at this point, let's just go ahead and assemble the switch, put the handlebars all back together, and the last thing we're going to do is put the grip on. You don't want to put the grip on now. You're going to get a lot better position of the grip once you have the handlebar plastics on. So you can see this clip kind of wants to slide all over the place. It's pretty normal. I would just get this started right here. Don't need to tighten it all the way because you have a little bit of adjustability in the position of the switch. And the screw that goes underneath is a smaller screw. And if you still have the pod turnstiles, you have to give them a little move out of the way. And kind of make sure the switch is positioned pretty well. There's a little bit of adjustability. Brake switch is all hooked up, we're good there. Take your handlebar cover, go ahead and make the connection. Make sure it snaps in place. Go ahead and snap the plastics all back into place. They have 4 snaps. And you make sure the seams are all snapped into the right positions. And then we'll start with the longest screws from the rear, the middle length screws up towards the front. Maybe easier to use a stubby Phillips screwdriver on the short so you're not right up against the front leg shields of the scooter like I am here. And you don't want to use any power drivers for these screws since the screws are going right into plastic. All right. And the last part will snap the headlight rim back into place. So get these lined up. The top will just snap into place. And you have the 2 short screws. And we'll get the chrome cover in. Of course, I kind of did this in the wrong order. Typically, you want to put this back in place before you do the top, but it is possible to pop into place after getting the handlebar covers in. And it just snaps right into place. Again, there's a little bit of adjustability, getting the seams all lined up. And use your T25 driver to put the last screw that holds this in place. Holds the bottom under here. Might be a good time to check all the electrical functions, all your switches, make sure everything's working before you go any further. We have this grip here. Clean most of the old adhesive out, and we're going to just go ahead and put some grip adhesive inside the tube in a small amount onto the metal tube and slide on there and let it set up and seal up. And I could see the lever has pretty equal distance from the bottom and the top, so that's pretty accurate on the position. Like I said, you could send the 5mm Allen down here and loosen that adjustment and make minor adjustments if needed to the lever perch position. So I'd recommend having a specific grip glue. We sell these single-use grip glues. You know, it's enough for 2 grips, and it's tool GG, so tool grip glue, tool GG if you want to buy a little tube, very inexpensive. If you're doing this at home, I just recommend a single use. This stuff dries up just like rubber cement. It's not the same as rubber cement, but it's really similar. So we have a little bit larger tubes here in the service department, and just you kind of put a perimeter around there. Don't really want to get on your fingers. Don't want to have it drip all over the place. And then just a small amount on the outside. And at this point, you don't really let it set up. If you have a particular position of the grip, this is the perfect time to set it up. And typically you just push it right on. And right when the grip touches the chrome, that's as far as you want to go. So leave it overnight, let it set up, and the grip's going to be, stay in place. So it's pretty important that your mirror has a good set of threads on it, reverse threads. And typically they include these washers. I'm not sure how effective these washers are. This little dome one, I put the inner part of the dome first, and then there's a flat washer. And at this point, I use my fingers to kind of hold them in place, and we'll get the mirror started. So make sure you don't cross thread it. You got to be extra careful. If it's the right one. Okay, there we go. I'm actually getting it incorrect, so I'm going, if you're looking at the top of it, you're going counterclockwise, and then get it, the mirror head just right over the grip typically. And with the lock nut, do the same thing. Go counterclockwise, and once you have the mirror head exactly where you want it, take care not to slit with the wrench. And I would go with this size wrench about as tight as you can go by hand. As long as you don't cross thread that, it will stay in place. Put the rubber back down in place, and now you're all set. The new mirror perch. Last thing we gotta do is readjust the rear brake. All right, so the rear mechanical brake, you have this little ferrule. It goes in here, it has a little hole for the threaded brake cable rod to thread through, and it's possible to shift the position, get that in the hole. And then you have the rear adjuster. I'm just holding the tension, where the brake pads are just making contact. Go ahead and thread that all the way in. And what I'll do is I'll check my setting right here. I'll move my hand, that's a little too tight. You do have to leave for some adjustability, where I would let the lever go in about 1 inch to 1.5 inches when it's cold, because sometimes on a hot day, the drum or the shoes will expand and you end up with a drag and brake, which is not a good situation. And once you have it in place, go ahead and tighten that lock nut. Just backs right up to that barrel, and now your brake is all set up. And that's pretty much all you got to do. You need a couple more tools than just a basic regular job or do an oil change on your Vespa, change out the lever perch. But pretty much anybody can do it if you're handy with some tools and you followed all the steps on how to do that. A little tricky if you've never seen that kind of setup. It's a little different than many other setups. Sometimes they use a half of a moon. It's a little easier. That's like on the brake master cylinder, which is a hydraulic brake. It's a little different setup than the tube. You don't need to remove the brake. But thanks for watching. This is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. If you stumbled across this video and it's your first time, consider subscribing. And if you're looking for any other content on how to service, repair, or accessorize your modern or vintage Vespa, of course, just type Vespa Motorsport in the YouTube search and it will bring you right to the Vespa Motorsport YouTube channel, and you can search for anything you want. How to do an oil change, how to rebuild an engine. I've probably done a video for it. Until next time, Robot here.